The sacred is revealed in the ordinary. There is a beauty in this. But how do we discover the mystery of the sacred in our seemingly mundane existence? Welcome to Revealed, a podcast sponsored by Resurrection Catholic Parish in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Let's join our hosts, Katie McAllister and Tony Pickler, as they explore the lives of people, organizations, and resources that will help us delve into the sacredness of the ordinary.
Welcome to Revealed, where we are going to be exploring the sacredness in ordinary life. Today we are super excited to have a very special guest. So Tony, why don't you introduce our guest for us, please?
Thanks, Katie. So today, yes, we are so privileged to be able to introduce to you the special guest of ours in Revealed. Martha has been a friend of mine for many, many years. And just about a year and a half or 2 years ago, Martha came out to me and said that she is transgender. And so I've learned a lot about transgender and the LGBTQ community since that time. And I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time since then. So, Martha, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, Martha, as we start diving into this, could you just help our listeners understand what is LGBTQ stand for? And sometimes when we hear additional letters at the end, what are all these letters mean?
Well, it is confusing, and frankly, they change about every 6 months. But the dominant ones for LGBTQ, L stands for lesbian, a person, usually female, who has an attraction for another female. G is for gay, and gay can be a broad term, but generally it means a male who has an attraction, sexual attraction for another male. Bisexual are those who feel attracted to both male and female. Transgender is a very big, broad term that covers a spectrum from a periodic cross-dresser to people who feel gender dysphoria and need of medical gender-affirming care. The Q stands for queer or questioning. Queer, again, is an umbrella term. It took me a while when somebody explained to me that I'm not just transgender, but I'm also queer. And that was not a term that I was comfortable with early on. But questioning, that's certainly me and many, many other trans people. Sometimes they add additional letters on the I, which is for intersex. And those are people who have more than X or Y chromosomes or may have ambiguous genitalia. A is for asexual, those who have no sexual attraction for either male or female. And sometimes they put a question mark on the end, just in case they missed anybody.
So you, I'm sure, get asked a lot about particularly being transgender. So can we dig a little bit more into that particular letter on the LGBTQ spectrum, and can you define it a little bit more, and then how do you describe yourself as being a transgender person?
Well, the first thing I like to say, and people say, could you describe yourself? I like to say I'm an amazing, talented person who's a husband and father. Thank you.
I affirm that in you.
And I'm retired, and I just happen to be transgender also. And for me, I consider myself dual gender. So I'm very comfortable as my male self, and most of my life I have presented as male, but I also have a feminine energy, spirit that's very strong within me. That also has to be expressed. So there's a variety of labels, and again, they change often. I'm gender fluid, gender diverse, gender questioning. If I had been born Native American, well within the culture and tradition of most Native American tribes is the idea of a two-spirit person. Now, I'm not Native American, so I can't apply that term to myself, but it is one that comes close to describing who I am. And if I do not allow time for either of those spirits to be present and expressed, the result is usually depression and other issues.
Would this also include like non-binary? I've worked with kids that have told me that they feel non-binary, and so I know that that is something that people express.
Yeah, well, non-binary would be that I'm not strictly male or strictly female. And that gets into, that question of what's the difference between sex and gender. Sex is biologically how we are born. Gender is how I see myself and how I experience my approach to the world around me, whether it be male or female. It's my experience of my innermost authentic self. And that's hard for people to comprehend, and sometimes to help them understand. I like to ask, how many know somebody who's left-handed? And everybody knows somebody. And then you say, well, when did they decide to be left-handed? Well, they don't. It just is. And it's natural. It's right. Left-handed people can do things with their right hand, but if they fumble, it's not as comfortable. Now some have, become ambidextrous. So I'm kind of an ambidextrous gender person, that I have been able to live in both worlds and find it very, very fulfilling. What it means to be male or female is very Western, Eurocentric in its orientation. It's how we were raised. It isn't necessarily how we are. So there are at least 37 cultures in the world that recognize multiple genders. There's one culture that recognizes 16 different genders. So if I had been born into a Native American tribe, my life would be much easier. But I was born into a Western European world where the binary system is well entrenched. Even though when we look at, let's start with women, how they present, there's no real limitations. They can wear slacks, shoes, tennis shoes, dresses, what. But a guy. But that's cultural. That's not the core of who we are. And sometimes that's a big threat to people.
I've been told, went to a workshop once, that this could be seen more on a spectrum, male, female, and really, although there's certain people that would never claim this for themselves, that everybody is female and everybody is male, and it's just it depends on where you fall on the spectrum, how male and whatever that means sometimes, and how female, whatever that means sometimes. Where you fall on that spectrum, would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. We have a support group that gathers on a monthly basis that has over 300 people who come to attend it periodically. And we have everything from the periodic cross-dresser to the person that needs gender-affirming medical, psychological care, and everything in between. People who spend half their lives as male and maybe in their 30s, 40s, realize that the addiction they've been battling, or alcohol abuse, or in my case, it was workaholicism, just keep away from those feelings. And when it's a given space, there's a profound sense of, yes, this is right. I recently read an article by Pope Francis talking about discernment. Trans people are the most contemplative, discerning people you can imagine, because they spend so much time trying to figure out who they are and listening to those voices deep within. And when they finally find their authentic voice, the result is a profound joy and peace that many have not found in years.
When you came out to me about a year and a half ago or so, you shared that this isn't something that you just discovered 2 years ago, that you knew you were transgender a long time ago. When did you first discover or kind of come to the realization that you're transgender?
Well, first of all, I'm old enough that there were no reference points when I was growing up. And so my first awareness that I was somehow different was during puberty, when I had a fascination, I would even go so far as obsession with women's clothing, which I didn't understand. Or I had 3 sisters and a strong mother, and but when I would try on their clothes, there was just something that goes beyond words that I knew I was touching. But at that time, I thought it was a sick fetish or obsession, and what I desperately needed to do was to find a good therapist, counselor. Throughout college, I went in search of information. Back then, there was no internet. There was no place to turn to get any information, to find any real role models. And it wasn't really until my mid-20s, early 30s that I saw the word cross-dresser and thought, oh, that's me, but boy, that's really sick. I remember going to the local public library to see if I could get some information about this phenomena. There was nothing under cross-dress, and the word transgender really wasn't present then either. So it was a rough period, and I understand, with the pressure from society, family, etc. I mean, nobody knew that I was going through these things because I didn't dare share it, lest I'd be ostracized from my family and what friends I had.
So would you say that was a very lonely time for you, trying to figure that out, or?
I wouldn't overdo that. Yes, it was a lonely time, but for me, I plunged into sports, student activities. I was a superstar of everything, so that I had no time to spend and allow. But when those moments did present themselves, they were profound.
So talking about your upbringing, you were raised Catholic. How was that being, reconciling the Catholicism with being trans?
Well, putting it bluntly, it was torture because everything around me, including the church, my relationship with God, told me that I was broken, I was inadequate, that, somehow God made a mistake when he made me. And, at first I thought, well, am I gay? In terms of attracted to other men? No. So what is this crazy thing? I remember my prayer constantly was asking God, why did you make me this way? And begging God, take it away. During my college days, I went to counselors, therapists, spiritual directors, priests, to talk about this. And they all looked at me with a blank stare and really had no answers, no real guidance. When I began my professional career, that had a lot to do with service to communities. I was dealing with the imposter syndrome. How could God be working with and through me to do a lot of good things? And yet I was so broken. So when I finally came to the realization, and more research was done and being published, to realize that this isn't something I chose. No trans person chooses to be trans. It's how we're created. And when I came to the realization that this wasn't going away, then I had to figure out, how do I integrate this into my life? And then my prayer to my God was, why did you make me this way? And I have a very vivid image throughout a lot of my life that every time I've asked that question of God, I have this fatherly imaged person who just smiles and says, trust me, I know what I'm doing. Your time will come. Well, I think in some of the work I've done in recent years, I know why I was made as I am.
Because you've known that you've been transgender for a long time, it seems to me the perception and the acceptance, or maybe the non-acceptance, of you and other transgender people has changed. So how would you say that's changed over the years?
Well, I think it's changed radically, because when I was growing up, if you were a comic and you wanted to laugh, you'd put on a dress. You know, Milton Berle, Flip Wilson, you can rattle off Bob Hope, Jackie Gleason, all. But it was a joke, which made it all the harder as a trans person, because I didn't think I was a joke. And so that has changed, especially in the media, through RuPaul, through Pose, through Transparent, through Caitlyn Jenner. Again, there are issues and challenges with all of those names, but we've made progress. Nowhere near enough, because I still live in fear and have to be careful. And I spend a lot of time coaching, talking with people, especially online, who have lived in fear all their lives and are still living in closets, afraid to come out. I have one person I know that has a wife who leaves for a girls' week out every year, and that's the only time she gets to dress, and lives just for that 1 week a year. And there are so many other stories like that. I am out and about, and frankly am a little shocked at how accepting so many people are. And whereas before I would hold my breath when I would walk into a new group, I don't anymore. Once in a while you get the infamous sideways look. Or if I'm in a restaurant, you can see 3 tables over that people are elbowing each other and pointing. I mean, I make no illusions that I quote pass. And I don't care. I'm comfortable with who I am and how God made me. And I think if we had more trans people who were out and about, it would become much more understandable and acceptable.
So people within the trans community say that they're misunderstood. What are some of those misunderstandings that you can shed some light on?
Well, yeah, that's a 4-hour lecture in itself. I think that the first misunderstanding is that trans people choose. We have no choice. And many of the trans community will say, if it wasn't for this opportunity that I have to get out, to connect, to get good counseling, good medical care, gender-affirming care, I would have committed suicide. Many, I actually know trans people who have committed suicide, which just breaks my heart. For trans youth, 40% have tried suicide. And if you're a trans person of color, the numbers go up even higher. So we don't choose. Second, it's not the result of some childhood trauma or, an overly dominant mother and an absent father or some other aberration. Third, it's not contagious. Just like when you meet someone who's left-handed, it's highly unlikely that you're suddenly going to become left-handed. Fourth, gender-affirming care, especially as youth, we need to clarify what that is. And that is usually a change in hairstyle, clothing. It's not, as some of the more traditional conservatives would say, the mutilation or damaging for life. It doesn't work that way. We are just normal people who someday I would love to do a video of my life, and at the end, because it's been an amazing life, and at the end saying, oh, by the way, he's trans, and then end the movie.
I know you've been involved in a lot of different efforts in this community around transgender and LGBTQ issues. Can you describe some of those efforts?
Well, first of all, it isn't just me. There's a small community of people, and 6 years ago, 4 of us, scared to death, gathered in the community room, and it was just a social support opportunity that we set up once a month. Well, we've only missed one session because of a snowstorm in 6 years. And now we average 35 people that show up for the monthly gathering. And it is social, but so much more support and sharing of resources, information, crying with one another, laughing with one another. I read an article recently suggesting that sometimes bars are a better community of faith than churches. And I hate to say that, but I found an amazing community of care. We cut across the spectrum with professional teachers, professors, geologists, architects, carpenters. It cuts through this. There's no socioeconomic, and we're all one community.
If you could tell Christian church leaders a few things about how better to understand and to minister to transgender people, what would you tell them?
Well, the first that I've referred to before is we're born this way. Catholic Church talks about natural law. This is how God created us. We don't have a choice. And as God's creation, we're created for good. And part of the challenge is, how do I use this unique gift that I have? I think it's important for Christian leaders to realize that their rejection, their willingness to listen, to really try to understand the trans community, their attempts to erase us, first of all, are futile. We've been here from the beginning of time, and we will be into the future no matter what. The disregard of Christian leaders hurts. It does play a role for those who are suicidal. It does play a role for those who turn to drugs and other ways to mask what society rejects as who we are. It does. That disregard encourages violence. It does encourage the breakup of families, because religion is often thrown in the face by an uncle, an aunt, a brother, a sister who says, yeah, but the church says you're sick. My last thing I would say for Christian leaders is, please, as Gaudium et Spes said, listen to the signs of the times. Listen to the science. Every major medical and psychological association has affirmed trans people as a unique part of nature, of life, and listen to the emerging theologies. So much of the thinking around the trans person and the church comes from the 13th century. We need to update that and be open to what Pope Francis calls God's surprise. We are God's surprises, and it's critical that the church be open to at least listening to us.
That's what I always feel like, regardless of what topic it is, it's the listening that is needed in all things.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile the Catholic Church teachings with being trans? How do you go forward?
Well, I take great solace in so many of the saints that didn't just follow the church, but followed the urgings of the Holy Spirit and followed the urgings of their relationship with their God. I take great solace in the person of Pope Francis, who has at least on 4 occasions publicly met with communities of trans people. So much of the synodal church that Pope Francis is promoting is built on listening, dialogue, mutual respect, accompaniment. I don't know of anyone in the United States, any bishop, that has spent real time listening in a safe place to trans people. So I can't reconcile much of the church. I'm grateful for the Catholic formation, grade school, high school, some of my college, but a sound grounding in Catholic social teaching and the basic command to love your neighbor and love your God. And I try to do that despite what some understand the church to teach.
Any thoughts you might like to share concerning gender questioning youth and controversies surrounding appropriate care?
Yeah, very much so. First of all, I think it's critically important to clarify what gender affirming care is, especially for youth. Let's clarify that especially a child under 18, when they experience gender confusion, responsible gender affirming care, and those are very, very important words. Responsible means that the child, the parents, a well-trained counselor, therapist, medical profession, become part of a team and together determine what the best course of support and care for that child is as they sort through gender confusion. Rarely, if ever, does it include surgery. So that whole thing that's thrown out regularly is ridiculous. Very rarely does it include the use of hormones. Now, where it is prescribed is when a child has gender dysphoria, and a very dramatic case of gender dysphoria, and then the hormones or sometimes puberty blockers actually postpone puberty and allow the child, the parents, the medical team, the counseling team, some additional time to delay puberty and to help the child so that when they get to 18 or older, they're in a position to make a well-reasoned and responsible decision. So the other thing that's critical in this is the support for parents, because there are no manuals. And I shouldn't say that. There are several books that have begun to be written lately that are pretty good. But parents need a support group too. And we do have one in the area for parents of trans youth so that they can be good guides and accompany their child through this journey.
Martha, a question we ask every guest on Revealed is, how do you see the sacred revealed in your life? And so as a transgender person, how do you see the sacred in that life?
Well, I mentioned earlier that in my service to people, I've had to deal with the imposter syndrome of how could God work with and through somebody who's trans and who the whole world says is sick, needs to be fixed. And yet, there were so many times in my life, and I've been able to do some I think, amazing things, that I would turn to my God in prayer and say, why? Why me? I mean, a person down the block can do this. And every time God would respond and say, no, you're the one. This is the time. There'll be time to deal with that other stuff. But right now, I need you to do this. And so those were profound moments in my life. At one point, I was fired out of the blue. And I remember going to a church randomly, and they were just starting up a mass, and the first reading of the day was from Samuel, where Samuel hears God's voice and runs, and his father says, I didn't call you. And the father finally figures it out and says, next time respond, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. That's been my life. And so the sacred has been very profound at each step, as God keeps saying, no, now, trust me.
So, Martha, we've covered a lot of ground, and I'm just curious, with the time that we have left, is there anything we didn't cover that you want to make sure you get out to the people in our community?
I guess the few odds and ends in it might underline things I've already said. But to be trans is to be a person of prayer and discernment, and very much in touch with. Now, some have been so hurt by the church that they can't use the word God. But they'll talk about that higher power, that innermost sacred reality that they get in touch with, that confirms who they are. I would say to those who are dealing with gender confusion, there is a well-documented story of Pope Francis meeting a trans person who asked, is there a place for me in this church? And Francis's response was to get up and hug the person and tell them, God loves you just the way you are. We don't need approval of the church to be able to live the gospel and to do good. And I encourage people of gender confusion to do just that. I think we are just a normal human variation, just as left-handedness, red hair, name the variation. And we're just part of that spectrum of life. I wish our churches could practice Benedictine spirituality, to welcome each and every person as if they were Christ. And my very last is somehow we've got to figure out how to break down the wall so that we can have an honest, responsible dialogue between trans people and church leaders.
Well, Martha, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us and for revealing who you are to us.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
This has been Revealed, a podcast sponsored by Resurrection Catholic Parish in Green Bay, Wisconsin.